There'll Never Be a Story of Forgiveness by Thomas Debarge. This book is dedicated to my children and grandchildren. My mistakes are for you to learn from, not an excuse for you not to succeed. Your race is designed especially for you to win, so go ahead and run. Remember to love and forgive. Never stop learning and growing as you're learning and growing. I love you. Chapter 1, Roots of Bitterness. Things couldn't have been good for Daddy and Mama during the 50s. There was a period of time in America when race issues were intense. Hate crimes were targeted by whites against blacks. The Ku Klux Klan strongly vowed to protect their interests by terrorist acts such as burning crosses, lynching, and murder, and Rosa Parks refused to take a back seat on the bus. Interracial relationships were labeled as taboo, yet my father, Robert Louis Debarge, a white man born in 1932, and my mother, Ederline Abney, a black woman born in 1934, met in Detroit, Michigan, and fell in love. Despite the racist attitudes around them, they looked at each other and saw something deeper than skin. I'm grateful Daddy and Mama didn't let color influence their decisions. Had they shied away from each other because of other people's opinions, my brothers and sisters and I wouldn't have existed in our uniqueness. They gave birth to 10 Debarge children: Ederline Bunny, Robert Louis Jr. Bobby, Thomas Keith, parentheses Tommy, William Randolph, parentheses Randy, Mark Dwayne, parentheses Marty, Aldra Patrick, parentheses L, James Curtis, Jonathan Arthur, parentheses Chico, Carol Francis, parentheses Peaches, and Daryl, parentheses Dakey. This is my family, my heritage, and my story as one of the siblings of the Debarge family. Mama's grandparents experienced the brutal reality of slavery in South Carolina. The fear, anger, depression, bitterness, regrets, and sorrow, these were things I believe to have been deliberately and systematically forced into the lives of black people, my family, to make it more personal, not by slave masters, but by an evil spiritual force with the goal of exterminating a special God-given purpose. It was a setup to show God's power if one could hold true to his or her part of the agreement, which was to love, forgive, obey, and so on. If one had weak faith, though, it was a sentence of doom. It had been several generations since slavery ended, but Satan's initial plan of destruction was at work full force in my mind. Evil churned steadily, making me a servant to a different type of taskmaster, one that couldn't be seen or heard with physical senses. Error reigned in my home and eventually in my heart, even if I was unwilling to acknowledge it. I may have been born physically free, but my thoughts, which are spiritual in nature, were stained with the fears my ancestors succumbed to. Insecurities were passed on to me, either unchecked or concealed by religion. I lacked value as a human being, which broke me down to accept the abuse I suffered as just being part of life. Mama's parents were William Preston Abney and Bessie Waters. They gave birth to William Jr., also known as Uncle Bill, Claire, Mammy, Norman, Marjorie, Phoebe, Johnny, Ernestine, Ederline, Bobby, James, and David. There were 12 siblings in total. Johnny passed away at the age of 14. He was said to have had brain damage and been retarded as a result of being dropped at birth. Phoebe died of cancer when she was 56 years old. Claire died at the age of 78 as a result of complications associated with diabetes, and Uncle Bill, of the same age, at 80. Ernestine, my mother's twin, died at age 70 of a sudden massive heart attack after a short time after having brain surgery. Uncle Bobby died from emphysema at age 73. Mama's father, Grandfather William, was a religious man. He believed in keeping his children active in faith, so church attendance had been regular and mandatory during Mama's youth. Mama and her siblings were part of the choir he directed. They traveled as a singing group around their hometown, performing at churches and the local radio stations for the white folks, as they called them. It was tough at the radio stations because hosts and station managers weren't always kind or willing to let Negroes sing to their white audiences. Mama, along with her family, held tightly to a godly hope that someday things would be better. Mama recalled her father riding a rickety motorbike about 5 miles to the factory where he worked to support his family. She remembered vividly the poverty of her youth. I wonder what his attitude had been like in such a struggle, if he was moody and approached the daily routine as a drudgery like Daddy, or if he had a good attitude when it came to taking care of his large family. She shared that her father made sure they didn't go hungry or suffer need of the essential things of life. He had clever ideas that he put to use each day to meet their needs. She remembered him being resourceful and using his intelligence to come up with something out of nothing. Grandfather William's real joy was cooking. Mama smiled when she talked about a delicious steak sandwich he used to make. She said it was one of her favorites. She also reminisced about his special sauce for various meats being tasty. He prepared food and sold it for extra money. Perhaps he had daydreamed of one day opening his own restaurant or selling a cookbook that contained his personal favorites. Or maybe it just pleased him that his children enjoyed a good meal made by his hands. Grandfather William passed away a few years prior to Mama meeting Daddy. Mama experienced normal grief when her father passed away. Like any other youth, however, she took advantage of his absence. Grandfather William was a strict man who allowed no dating. He wasn't around, so Mama dated. She was confident the relationship between her and Daddy never would have taken place had her father been around. A father's active role in the life of his daughter maintains a necessary level of respect when a young lady starts seeing a man. Mama didn't honor her father's instructions along the lines of relationships, which prompted young men. Daddy specifically to treat her differently than had her father been on the scene. Mama's mother, Grandma Bessie, was a housewife who was loyal to God and to her husband. She had been raised by an aunt because her mother died at a young age, possibly during childbirth. I was 5 when Grandma Bessie passed away of a heart attack associated with diabetes. My memories of her didn't fade away. She was affectionate towards me and protective when Daddy tried to dole out the discipline around her. I missed seeing her after she died, and I longed for her protection when chastisement would come. She had good family values and showed her grandchildren much love. Mama's family lived in a newly built project-style homes in Detroit. They were allowed to live in 2 units because of the large size of the family. One tub is often shared between all of her brothers and sisters. Clothing was never the latest fashion, but items were handed down until they had no more ability to withstand wear. Claire learned to sew and used her skill to make clothes for her brothers and sisters when she could get material. There was a local charity called Goodfellows that assisted the family by donating items upon availability. Through the suffering of never seeming to have enough, Mama learned to appreciate what she had. My father was born to John Arthur Debarge and Frances Jane Walters. I never got to meet Daddy's parents. Both of them passed away when I was very young. Grandfather John was born in a French settlement in southern Indiana, and Grandma Frances was from Illinois and a member of the Morning Star Lodge Masons. Daddy shared with me that Grandma Frances was blessed to bear 8 children amid a few miscarriages. Daddy was the 6th child born. His brothers and sisters were Anna Mary, John, Francis, Jane, Ronald Milton, George Raymond, Carol Yvonne, and William Earl. I wasn't able to obtain much more than hearsay from Daddy about his parents. Daddy didn't talk much about them or his past at all, except in sharing amazing fables. It wasn't clear if his stories were fact or fiction. He said they were bigots, and supposedly that was the root of their distant relationship. Growing up, it was like no other Debarges existed in the world except me and my brothers and sisters. I didn't develop a rapport with much of Daddy's family at all. He kept us away from them, or they purposely stayed away from us. I reasoned why relationship never took place with Daddy's family, coming to the conclusion that I was just an unlikable person. Dwelling on why his parents and siblings didn't love me and never even wanted to meet me was a preoccupation that made me feel anxious, like I wanted to become someone else who they would like. None of it mattered after a while because there was so much other chaos in my life. Daddy displayed character flaws that revealed evidence of a troubled childhood. If the rest of his family was anything like him, I was glad to have been kept at a distance. I had to accept his heritage as a part of me left blank in my memory. Uncle George, Daddy's older brother, died of cancer around 1995. Daddy grieved heavily over the loss. It was with great honor that I did meet Uncle George prior to his death. I also had an opportunity to meet and spend some time with a second cousin bearing my name, Tom. sorry. Like any other youth, however, she took advantage of his absence. Grandfather William was a strict man who allowed no dating. He wasn't around, so Mama dated. Sorry. Uncle George, Daddy's older brother, died of cancer around 1995. Daddy grieved heavily over the loss. It was with great honor that I did meet Uncle George prior to his death. I also had an opportunity to meet and spend some time with a second cousin bearing my name, Tom. They were parts of my daddy which made talking with them unique experiences I cherished. They looked like him and had mannerisms like him. Detroit, Michigan was where it all began with Daddy and Mama. Daddy was stationed there in the Army at the age of 21 when they coincidentally met. Mama had an interest in a young man named Robert Barnes who was part of the same military as Daddy. She telephoned to speak with him. The person relaying the call was mistaken to have said Robert Debarge. Both names sounded similar, so Daddy took the phone call. When they spoke, an interconnection was made. Daddy explained to Mama on that very first phone conversation that she was going to be his wife. Mama thought he was a crazy man and laughed at his absurd comments. They didn't even know each other and had never spoken prior to that moment, so the mention of marriage was ridiculous to her. Daddy was persistent in his declaration. In his mind, they had already met, dated, and fell in love. He was aggressive, intending to back up every word he spoke. They made plans that day on the phone to meet later in the week at the skating rink. They exchanged details about themselves so as to be identified by one another. Daddy would be wearing a uniform and Mama's attire would be a red dress veiled with a particular coat. Both anticipated putting faces with the voices they had enjoyed over the phone. Upon meeting, Daddy was impressed with Mama's outer beauty. She had dark, even-toned skin and was shapely. He perceived her to be a beautiful black woman without a flaw. Mama found Daddy was a handsome man. He was slim, not too tall, had stark blue eyes. As the evening went on, Daddy found that Mama's loving spirit completed the package. They held interesting conversation which passed the time quickly. The joyful evening of holding hands, laughing, and skating compelled them to continue to seeing each other. Mama was a churchgoer who was supposed to be living by strict religious laws. Being at the skating rink was a sin, but overstepping the set guidelines pertaining to the skating rink, Mama had a backslider in the church's eyes. Hooking up with Daddy was icing on the hell-bound cake. He wasn't a Christian. All church girls knew not to associate with unsaved men. Though Mama professed love for God, she found that the church's rules were only flesh-deep when it came to her feelings. What the preacher said didn't penetrate deep enough into her heart to keep her from the skating rink or from wanting to be with Daddy. Getting involved with a man of opposite background and ethnic origin didn't settle well in Mama's surroundings. Grandma Bessie was intentionally uncomfortable with her daughter's brow-raising relationship with a white man. She asked Mama what peace she thought she was going to have with the whole world against such a union. Mama's brothers and sisters questioned her rationale as well. All Mama knew was that she wanted to be with him. Daddy was a charmer. He quickly won the favor of Grandma Bessie with his generally pleasant personality. Mama's decision was eventually accepted by her siblings, though home wasn't the only territory when she had to contend for her preference. Mama was still a student when she paired up with Daddy. Classmates at her segregated high school couldn't understand her decision to be with someone not of the black race. Some condemned her while others shook their heads with compassion for her, perceiving her to be setting herself up for causeless difficulties. Friends attempted to reason with her by suggesting to her young black men who were fellow classmates. Mama was steadfast in her choice. I admired her courage in walking in what she believed, whether right or wrong. Whether she knew what she wanted, she proceeded with a quality of mind and spirit that was confident in the face of opposition. She continued to date Daddy at the cost of losing friendships. Daddy may not have been under religious restraints when it came to seeing Mama, but he was certainly breaking his family values of racism. He was no longer in his parents' home, so he was free to be with any woman he pleased as long as she wasn't black. Mama told me Daddy's mother went to extreme measures to keep the two of them from being together. She said Grandma Frances had offered her money to leave Daddy alone, and when Mama refused, she influenced the decision for him to be sent away on military duty, hoping to destroy their bond. That didn't work either. Daddy was scheduled for departure from Detroit by the Army. He purposely missed his train so he could elope with Mama. He took her to the Hall of Justice where they officially became Mr. and Mrs. Debarge. He then reported to his destination before in serious enough trouble to be reprimanded for violation of duty. Daddy made it a point to exclude any other choice of a mate besides himself from Mama's life. He boldly told her she wasn't to have any other males in the picture. She wasn't allowed to talk with any other young men, not even as friends. He made it clear that her life was to revolve solely around him. Mama may have taken a bit of pride in being a prized possession at the beginning. This being her first love relationship, she closed her eyes to the initial signs of Daddy's dominating character. She was young and too naive at the time to realize the depth of pain that had laid back a possessiveness that made her feel special. She would later discover that Daddy's syrupy words were poisonous fangs he would use to bite into the veins of those whom he said he loved.